Today is December 15th, 2024. Let's begin as we always do by setting our intention and making aspiration. And it's important this section of practice. Tibetan Buddhist practice, there's three sections always, three components, three parts. The first is the motivation, making aspiration. And then there's the actual practice, whatever that may be. If it could be just sitting meditation practice, it could be, Tonglen, it could even be, some kind of Vajrayana practice, if that's what you're doing, Yidam practice. And then the third is the dedication. And we really have to not look at these components, especially the motivation and the dedication, as just like some formality, some kind of just a rote kind of ritualistic thing. This is as much as the practice as the meditation is, or whatever practice you're doing. The view of Buddhism is established in this, motivation, and it's kind of solidified in the dedication. We're sealing our practice with the view. It's really, really important to start to think that way, and this is what separates, Buddhist meditation from a secular. Not that you have to be a Buddhist to do this practice, but that this is what the approach that we're coming from. We have to encompass the view of Buddhism, which is about interdependence and impermanence and dependent arising, and the fact that we're all, we see things from a very subjective point of view, which is a distortion of the nature of true reality. Now, that's a lot of words. And seeing ourselves as our true nature being part of a gigantic whole that encompasses all sentient beings is a very difficult concept to, realize, embody, act from. But this is, the beginning of how we do it is by really looking into this motivation of bodhicitta. So when we do this, it's not just let's get it out of the way so I can get to my sitting practice, so I can calm down for the day, so I can, Tsoknyi Rinpoche used to say in his teaching, I heard him say, a lot of us, it's like we do our practice so we can, calm down and then go out into samsara, and be masters of samsara, and be calm as we kind of, work in our real lives. Well, this is as real as anything else, this is more real than anything else, really. This is approaching our true nature. So we really have to, when you do your own practice at home, we really encourage you to implement, the beginning and end, the motivation and the dedication, and to really let it touch your heart, let it infuse itself in your mind, rather than just being some, prescribed, rote introduction to kind of move through so you can get to your meditation that's going to make you feel better today. With all that in mind, let's say the four measurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that is never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. I think Victoria's going to speak a little bit more in depth in relation to what I spoke of. But I'm going to read a quote. I spoke about this page on Instagram, where I'm sure most of you are on Instagram, because that's how you probably found this class. jangchub.norbu, JANGCHUB.NORBU. It's a really good Instagram page. You know what I realized is I'm very slow to understanding algorithms and Instagrams and things like that. But if you go, if you know, kind of search for Buddhist pages and then keep liking them a lot, you'll get more Buddhist pages. That's how the algorithm. So what you like, uh, when you mark that you liked it, the algorithm will feed you more of it. So that's a good, rather than getting bogged down and into a lot of meaningless or negative or whatever obsessive things. Not a bad thing to be um, algorithm algorithmed by. Um, okay, so this is a quote from a teacher that we speak of very often in this class. We recommend his books, his YouTube, his website, his teachings in person or online, and he's teaching very, very often and all around the world. And his name is Dzongkhar Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche. You can go to the Solidago Productions website and you'll see his name and some of his books. So here's a quote. Um, and think, as you hear this quote being read, relate it to what we were talking about in terms of the four immeasurables and bodhicitta and interdependence and, our true nature being, inseparable from all sentient beings and all that. Think of it in that terms. Rejoicing at someone else's success is perhaps the easiest way of accumulating merit. It's as if a huge amount of merit were just hanging around waiting for you to pick it up. When you see someone do something worthwhile, all you have to do to accumulate oceans of merit is rejoice in their positive activity. This is also a powerful antidote to the most ridiculous and pathetic emotional response we suffer from, jealousy. Rather than indulge your jealousy, rejoice when you see someone beautiful or successful and remind yourself that those qualities are the result of their patience and generosity in previous lives. We always talk about, how to bring the practice, and things that we, practice in this class into daily lives, bring meditation in daily lives. I mean, this is a kind of a great, um, as he says, antidote, the the negative emotion of jealousy, which we all have very much, people we know, family members, people we don't know, people we read about, people we see on the street, strangers, friends, colleagues, competitor, all these things, or we perceive as competitors. Um, I mean, I think it's something, I mean, personally, it's something that I experience, often. So, as you experience these things often, you can, if we start to use that as practice, okay, here's I have a knee-jerk reaction of jealousy because this person has that and I should have that or I want that. And then making, and it's all about the awareness that the jealousy has arisen because we're so habituated to it, we don't even notice it. We just immediately have the feeling of it and maybe the action that follow, the thoughts and the actions that follow uh, the knee-jerk reaction to jealousy. But if we can start to cultivate some awareness and mindfulness and notice when these emotions come up, then we can, use the antidote of rejoicing as um, this person's good fortune is the result of positive activities, and I rejoice in people's positive, activities. As a Buddhist point of view, you know, um, positive actions lead to positive results. So, when you see someone with, as he says, rejoicing in someone else's success, the fact that they've had success is the result of their patience and generosity in past lives. Good way to accumulate merit, as he says, you know. And merit is kind of like the bank account that we need to help us along our practice, remove obstacles from practice, and allow us to deepen our connection to the teachings and the teachers and the Dharma and the Buddha and all those things. Okay. Victoria's going to speak first, and then we'll sit for a while. Okay.
So, what Michael was just saying, what is this merit? Merit is the condition. So, there are two obstacles, two obscurations to enlightenment, to liberation, which is the same thing. Enlightenment is not that we read so many things and we know so much and we can have debates and arguments. You know, enlightenment is removal of the veils. By removing the two veils, our nature becomes evident and we're united with it. It's the veils is almost like being away from home and not knowing how to return to it. That's why the teachings often are referred to as secret, because we cannot see them directly until this removal, this process of purification happens. Through activity of merit, we remove, we pacify the afflicted mind. We pacify the 5 afflictions with which the ego, the self-grasping, is kind of coated with, you know. So instead of an ordinary reaction, the ordinary reaction would be the reaction of jealousy. That's ordinary mind. That's on the basis of the ego, when we see something, craving, desire, jealousy, anger, frustration awakens. Enlightened mind, when these obscurations are removed, merit removes the afflicted, the 5 afflictions, and wisdom. So there are 2 things that we need. We need merit and wisdom. Merit removes the afflictions, and wisdom removes the very, very basis, the self-grasping that believes that I exist. Wisdom removes this notion that I am this kind of a center, that what I see is direct reality out there through my senses, etc., etc. And in one way, it is true. What I see out there is the reflection of my mind. But let's be clear about what it is. An ordinary person has this kind of an unexamined notion that my senses give me and yield true information about the world. And a wise person, a practitioner who understands what gets input to the sensor information, but what gets coded over that sensor information are my likes and dislikes, my 5 afflictions, my self-grasping, whether it's individual kind of coding, social coding, linguistic coding, psychological coding. That's why we never experience one thing as an identical thing outside of the labels that we put. Let's say we see a bee, and for someone who's a botanist, a botanist will look at a bee and think, oh my God, there's no creation, there's no sustaining, there are no trees, no flowers, no food, no agriculture, no human existence without a bee. For someone who was stung by a bee and had, some kind of a reaction that was life-threatening, a bee means something completely different. So outside of a label, our experiences are vastly, vastly different. But what is the same is the subjective nature of all experience. Anyway, to continue with Michael's point, is where does practice happen? Practice happens inside the process of our reaction. It's how we meet the world, right? So when we meet the world with knowing that what we see out there is our mind, Appearances are our mind. And when we know that our mind is transforming, for example, when we have a difficult situation, but our response, because practice is in the responses, right? Where do we practice in difficult situations? In the way we look out there at the world. If our response is not habitual jealousy or anger or desire or me, mine, then we know practice is happening and we're not simply speaking about it. Practice is happening when we don't say things like, oh, he said this and she said this and I'm so angry about it, but I know it's all empty. That's just talk. That's not practice. Practice is when emptiness actually occurs at the moment of where I'm about to get angry, but then wisdom clicks in and I say to myself, well, this difficult situation is co-created, co-written by me. I am in this situation with the other person. My judgment is just layers of habitual habits, mental formations, etc., and I don't need to impose that on the situation, because if I impose judgment, I'm not really seeing the situation clearly. If I impose a lot of me, mine, my emotional states, when the emotions are very, very high, there is certainly no clarity. There is certainly no practice. So practice, we know practice is actually working, and we're practicing when our responses have changed to openness and clarity. When we can, especially in difficult situations, there's not such a great need in moderate kinds of situations where, there is no this, I need to protect myself, somebody's harming me, somebody's this and this, when there's not this like giant surge of electricity which turns inward to me. How could this happen to me? Why was my thing taken? Why does he have it and I don't? When we are faced with those kinds of situations and wisdom mind clicks in and then reminds us we're all interconnected. There is impermanence, emptiness. When I can respond to the situation with a open, more empty of judgment mind, more empty of the me and mine mind, then we are actually practicing. Practice is taking place. It's not when we give a list of grievances and at the end of it we feel like a great practitioner by saying, but I know it's all empty. Well, I know it's all like this and like this. That's not practice. That's just blabbing and thinking, being stupid and arrogant. That practice is actually taking place when we can kind of add that little addendum to the sentence. Practice is happening when our reactions, when we're experiencing our reactions as very still and subdued. By that, I don't mean that we stop feeling, that we stop seeing beauty, that we are not compassionate and ready. No, what I mean is that this me and mine, the grasping, the 5 emotions that protect this kind of ego structure, the basic ignorance, because the 5 emotions come together in a bundle with this belief in the I and mine. When we can relax that belief, we can relax that basic co-emergent ignorance, and we can relax the 5 afflictive states that go with that basic ignorance. Our experience of the world is very, very different. The world becomes very precious, and beings in it become very precious. We can exercise patience in difficult situations with difficult people. We can have forbearance and diligence because we know these mental states that person may be experiencing are impermanent. We have compassion to the difficulty. And our own reactions become extremely, extremely difficult. We're not complaining about difficult people. We rather are saying, well, what can I do to make the situation, how can I disarm the situation? How can I disarm the ticking bomb? And we certainly remove ourselves as a part of that ticking and agitation. Then we know practice is happening. So when we speak about bodhicitta, the compassionate mind of awakening, where heart and mind are the same thing. It's not just this calculated response of the ego, but rather it is the wisdom mind that immediately connects to all, remembers that relative reality is all about interconnectedness. There's no I that is separate anywhere to be found. It's just an illusion. We are connected to all things, living and elemental. That's how we're just these events. And that's why we also bring to mind impermanence, and we bring to mind empty of this self-existence notion. I am here, the I am here has to change for I am here for everything, connected to all things. And I am aware of my very, very fluctuating and permanent condition. So I will make this moment important, and I will make this moment a moment of practice. And bodhicitta, thinking on bodhicitta, setting our mind, setting our intention, whether we sit to practice or we go outside to meet others or do things, when we can actually enter life with the intention of bodhicitta, we right away have a direction rather than just being lost in the leaky plumbing of samsara, where, each situation is like a sparking of one afflictive state to another, to another, to another, whether it's a judgment or anger or jealousy, or I'm speaking badly of others, I'm judging situations, I'm speaking badly about them, idle gossiping, spending time just mindlessly surfing on our computers, etc., etc. But when we can be guided by the motivation of bodhicitta, and make our experience as something, make bodhicitta our lens through which we experience reality, and especially others. And ourselves. We ourselves are also included. We also ease judgment on ourselves as well as we ease the judgment on others. We ease the burden of desire and fear, and we can move through life in a very, very different way, because it's much more realistic to understand our impermanent situation, to understand our fragile situation, to understand our seed of Buddhahood and try to cultivate it in every moment, and have patience that if in this moment we did not act as we should have, that we have the patience and we can aspire. We can fall and bend, but we can wake up and be in a better place tomorrow. We have to have patience and love with ourselves. That's where we have to start. Because if we understand that when we look out there, we see the reflection of our mind, we have to start with ourselves. We have to work on ourselves. We have to start with our anger. We have to start with our jealousy. We have to start with our desire and craving. And then when we can really acknowledge and know these places inside ourselves, we can bring it to the world, and we can approach others with that same patience. So we always have to start here where we are, without lying to ourselves, in complete honesty, in complete and patience and forbearance, and a compassionate attitude to ourselves. It doesn't help when we beat ourselves up and we say, I'm gonna be better, and we're just only using that same kind of a hammer mind to get to our goals through ignorance and through the 5 afflictive mental states. So, when we sit to practice, we aspire that this practice really changes who we are on the inside. So when we step away from our practice cushion and we step into the world, that we bring another version of ourselves. And by the way, it doesn't really matter which practices we are doing. Our practices will become deeper as the view becomes more internalized and actualized. Actualizing practice, you will see the evidence of it in your responses in your daily life. It's a very different thing than just speaking about it, debating, and using, using Buddhism as another kind of an attachment, an addendum that makes us beat on others even stronger. Well, I'm a Buddhist and I know better than you. No, that's not Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice is when we become softer, when our heart becomes bigger, when we have our capacity becomes more and more and more infinite. That's when the view is really settling in us. That's when we're habituating it. It's becoming us. It is like the set of glasses. It's like becoming that our eyes look at reality softer, see others with more patience. And that's when we know that we're practicing. And bodhicitta as this kind of a direction. We sit, or we stand, or whatever we do, we speak, body, speech, and mind activities, the three doors, when they're activated and filtered through the eyes of bodhicitta, our world becomes very, very different. Our experience becomes very different. Experience of self and others, becomes much more softer. We can see really the lines of interconnectedness. Our experience is based on the sensitivity that I and the other are inside this dance and we're changing each other. It's not like me and him. He said this and I heard this. I am the right one, he's the wrong one. These coarse mental states are really kind of they're pre-beginner Buddhist mental states. They're what is called in Buddhism as ordinary deluded mental states. And as beginners, as practitioners, we put on the glasses of bodhicitta, and we always and all the time maintain awareness and vigilance that we are looking through everything, whether examining ourselves or others, through the glasses of bodhicitta. The two levels of bodhicitta, the ultimate bodhicitta, which is the condition of all of us, of everything, the oneness in which we're all present, and the relative, the condition that we acknowledge that we're moving through the world while we are embodied in this body, through the senses, through the interconnectedness, impermanence, interdependence, etc. Really directionality. Without bodhicitta, there is no direction. We could practice this and we can practice that, and we will seek like higher practices, and we will seek more empowerments and more this and more this, but without bodhicitta, it's like driving around in a car without a destination. We don't know where we're going. We're enjoying the view, we're enjoying the ride, but we really have no direction. It is only the mind of bodhicitta that actually gives us this directedness, a line. And then whatever practices we're doing, they could be the most simple practices, because the bigger the heart of bodhicitta, the mind of bodhicitta becomes, the deeper the practice becomes. And there is no ordinary practice. What makes a practice extraordinary is this heart mind of bodhicitta. So beginning, the aspiration is remembering. That's mindfulness, remembering I'm going to go out there, I'm going to put bodhicitta on myself. Middle, the practice itself, we're remembering that we're doing practice to liberate all sentient beings. And in the end, we take all the merit that we have accumulated through the practice, and we added the drop to the drop of the merit of all Buddhas and sentient beings who are practicing together with us. So our little drop becomes something very substantial, because it joins this infinite ocean of merit of all beings who have practiced like that, who are practicing now and have come before us. So just remembering that bodhicitta is not just this kind of loose term that We just, use randomly. We recite the four immeasurables. We just blah, blah, blah them, in the beginning of the practice. And then we blah, blah, blah the dedication in the end of the practice. We remember that if we are electrical devices, that the bodhicitta is like putting the plug into the outlet. And the ultimate bodhicitta is the electricity that exists and governs the universe. So this is how we practice, with bodhicitta in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And as bodhicitta mind and heart grows, because bodhicitta is much more than just an intellectual mind. We need the mind. There's a much greater component, things of infinity and more, the things of experience. We need the heart. We need the awareness on its kind of infinite scale. So that's why it's not just we call it mind, but it's a much bigger thing than conceptual mind. Conceptual mind is a little speck inside our true awareness. And so bodhicitta, beginning, middle, and end. There are really no practices. There's kind of no moving through life for Buddhists without bodhicitta. And so just remembering that it's not some kind of trivial thing that we learn here and there. We hear about it all the time. But it's something that is really the vehicle. It's the map, the vehicle, the map, the destination of where we're going,
Okay. I think there's a lot of new people here today, so maybe we'll do a little review of the basic technique. And really, before we even start that, to try to take what Victoria was talking about to heart today, literally to heart, right? And move into the technique and the sitting practice with, what she just described in mind, and just, breathe with that for a minute. Just settle into that for a minute before we begin.
And I just want to add one tiny little thing. The reason why we settle the mind, this layer of mind with the thoughts, we're settling the conceptual mind, which is a very tiny little fragment of mind, but we're so occupied inside it, thinking of subject-object dualistic kind of relationship, that we don't connect to the bigger space of our awareness. So we sit to settle this little fluffy mind, so that we may connect to the ground, to our ground awareness.
So if you're going to sit, usually we sit cross-legged. A cushion really helps, because you want to get your hips either in line, level, or above the knees to take some pressure off your lower back. Some people can just sit on the floor and be fine, depending on your level of physical comfort and ability. Or you can sit in a chair if you physically can't, sit on the floor. In a chair, your feet should be on the floor and your legs kind of at a right angle, and the back straight. That's what's really important. Both in a chair or on the cushion, the back is straight, but it's not like rigid. It's not forced. It's supple, straight but supple. We always use the analogy of the guitar string, right? Not too tight, not too slack. Too tight, too slack doesn't make a tone. Just enough tension makes the tone. The head is slightly tilted, like the chin slightly down, not back up like this, but just slightly. And the hands, often we do this, so left hand's open and the right hand goes on top and in the lap. Just rest it, or you can have both your hands on your top of your knees. The mouth is gently closed, but the teeth are slightly apart, and the tongue resting where the upper teeth meet the roof of your mouth. So we're breathing through our nose, unless you can't, because of congestion or whatever, and then you can breathe through your mouth. And in this class, we practice with eyes open. And the gaze, so kind of follows the angle of the bridge of your nose, the angle of your gaze, and the gaze rests on whatever's in front of you. You know, if you can have something in front of you that is inspiring, like a picture, or an image of the Buddha or something, a flower, a view, or anything like that. But it shouldn't be something that's going to create its own story and allow your mind to, you know, take off in directions uh, inspired by whatever you're looking at. It's just something to rest your gaze upon. And then we just start to breathe. Natural breath, you know. We're not doing short breaths, we're not doing huge breaths, just a natural, easy breath. And letting go of physical tension from within this posture. And we're going to focus on the breath. I'm going to start. We focus on the breath, the place where the breath moves in and out, you know, the top of the upper lip where it meets the nostrils. Focus your attention there for a few breaths. And the real crux of this technique is just looking at what your mind is doing as you're focusing on the breath. And when you're aware that your mind has drifted, your attention has drifted into some kind of thought, just simply say to yourself back to the breath, or just simply shift your awareness back to being aware of the movement of the breath. We also use the technique of imagining the mind, which is what we're trying to pay attention to and have awareness of what's happening in the mind as we focus on the breath. At the same time, we're kind of conscious of what our mind is doing. Think of the mind as a clear, stainless, spotless, limitless, luminous, infinite sky, blue sky. And a thought, thinking of, I have a thought of what time I have to be downtown, what time I have to leave to get there. And immediately, with the awareness that my mind is now on this, story and future thing, worry, or, with that awareness that that has arisen, I see that as a cloud, the thought as a cloud that has arisen in the sky. The thought has arisen in the mind, the cloud has arisen in the sky, and then just watch it dissolve back into the sky-like nature of mind, limitless, calm, cognizant, aware, calm, sky-like nature of mind, dissolving back into it, not leaving a trace. And these techniques are repeated throughout the sessions. Back to the breath. Thought dissolves, cloud dissolves into the sky-like nature of your mind, and rest there. If you have to shift, if you're feeling uncomfortable or tension, shift and then settle back into the posture, back into the technique, back into the breath. Think of mind as limitless, infinite, spacious, spacious. Clarity. Calm. Cognizant. Aware. And back to the breath. See the thought, the cloud dissolve back into the sky. Mind, nature, mind. Settle again. You may find yourself either having a lot of thoughts and having to apply a lot of techniques, or you may not be aware that you've drifted off for quite a while. Don't judge that. Don't judge the thought. Don't feel it's wrong to have those experiences. Just apply the technique once awareness has arisen. Once you've settled into awareness, just apply the technique. Go back. Back to the breath. Back to the breath. Watch the thoughts that have arisen, and that luminous clarity of mind dissolve back into it without leaving a trace, or just focus again on the movement of the breath. Don't judge the experience. Don't judge what comes up. Don't judge what goes away. Back to the breath. Great. So we can move into taking some questions about either what we spoke about, or the practice itself. And you can use the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. How do you react softly when given a hostile form of communication? I recognize people are at different stages of maturity and spiritual growth, but in the moment, is it always best to not respond? Um, you may not have, reacting softly may not be the proper response. You know what I mean? What is more important is to take away your own um, your own the ego part that gets injured by something like that, right? That's really what we're trying to focus on. So somebody's hostile to you, um, your ego's attacked. This is unfair. How dare they say this to me? If we can work with that, then the reaction, if we can work with that and kind of understand, let that go, then the reaction can kind of follow coming from more of a wisdom place, some a more aware. Wisdom is getting maybe ahead of ourselves, but a place with more awareness, with a little more air, because often, when we feel threatened, when we feel attacked, when we feel disrespected, the vision, the view gets very, very narrow, that self-defense mode. Um, and naturally, that's not, we're not talking about, beating ourselves up for that. That's a natural response to those things. If we can bring some awareness to the moment and see, this person's coming from a very petty place, they're coming from a wounded place, it really doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not a judgment on me. And then, if you're coming from a more wider view that has some air, that has some space, then you can respond, I think, with a little more equanimity in the situation. Now, that doesn't always mean softly. Sometimes maybe you have to like break through to somebody to kind of wake them up, or set a certain boundary, or sometimes you have to be forceful in a situation. Buddhism is often gets kind of colored with this. We become these very kind of quiet, meek, detached kind of people who are just a little bit removed from everything that's going on, and these interpersonal relationships and dynamics and things like that. And it's not always the case. It's not always about you kind of avoiding situations because you don't want to be involved or engaged. Certain times, you're put in positions where you may need to wake this person up a little bit or teach them something in the moment that that they can kind of see what's going on for themselves. So it's a little bit, reacting softly is a little tricky. um, is it always best to not respond? What's best is to bring some mindfulness into how you're responding. I think that has to happen first. Do you want to elaborate?
I think what's very important is one's own before, something escapes through the three doors of body, speech, and mind. Before we answer or do, we should always be extremely clear on what basis our response is happening. If the basis is going to be on my affliction, such as anger or impatience, frustration, things like that. Those are all different subtle forms of, impatience, frustration, even being irritated. Those are all forms of anger. So just to be very, very clear, there's like light on the dimmer. There are various forms of anger. And anger can also become hatred and murder and things like that. But those are all from one and single seed. So very, very important to understand on what basis we are responding, what our reaction is really motivated by. And even before we say or do anything, let's make sure that we are looking at the other person and remembering bodhicitta, that we can say the four immeasurables even before we say anything else. May you have happiness, be free of suffering, and may I bring you to Buddhahood. If we can precede our answer or action by that mind of awakening, that mind of compassion, which is the same thing, most likely our response is not going to be based on a selfish, how can they do that to me thing. And the more we take out the me and mine and the afflictive habitual behaviors, just remember, they're just habits. These kinds of responses are just habits. And if we continue to have the same habitual things happen, like people make us mad all the time, that person makes us mad all the time, what is actually evident about those responses is that I am stuck in my habitual patterns. I have not dismantled anything. I have not practiced. Practice is when we can remove the habitual response and create open space. Then we can answer, because if the basis is, let's say we're beginner practitioners, and we cannot really honestly say to ourselves, I can work out of complete benefit for the other place. But at least if we can work from, and this is being honest to oneself, being aware of where we are, if we can at least act from a place which removes the habitual afflictive response, we can experiment with the openness, with patience, forbearance. We can give that person the space that they need, whatever they're going through with it, and take out this whole me. How can they do this to me thing? We're starting to practice. So that's very, very important. Softly with yourself, softly with softening that response of anger or whatever habitual afflictive response that we're used to. If we can start to soften that place, then we are actually practicing. We're working with ourselves. Because very easy to kind of come and crash like this, two boulders, one against another, two idiots, one idiot against another. But, that's not practice. That's just an ordinary habitual way that we act as, two ignorant beings bouldering and, clashing against one another. Practice is softening our own from inside of ourselves, working with our afflictive emotion, not judging. That's working with our afflictive emotion, softening that place, softening that habit, opening it, finding the space, finding the motivation to benefit the other, finding the motivation. May I not be like this rock. May I not be this angry place. May I not be this jealous place. May I give myself to you in a different way with love and compassion, softening little by little the response. And you will see eventually there's not going to be that many things that make you so mad. You will be much more clear about what's happening inside yourself and with the other. And the response will be much more of clarity and openness rather than this two boulders colliding all the time, which is a more habitual kind of a place.
And also, often it is our own habitual thoughts and mindset that can perceive a communication as hostile when maybe from another point of view it's not.
Right.
Got to remember that too, you
Yes.
know. Just because we may perceive something as hostile just because it's our habitual response and our habitual kind of point of view of that kind of communication, so that's another thing to consider.
But it's always on the side of my response, softening my response, making sure, controlling that I'm not acting out of a place of an affliction, such as anger or frustration, etc. That my response is softer, that I soften that habitual ignorant place. When I can find that softening inside myself and put some air into it, I will have already changed the situation completely. Because ultimately, it's not about changing other people, but when I change myself and I am in the dance with that person, I already changed the situation. So working like that, working with our mind, not putting up this shield and slapping on the outside, but opening, widening, and remembering our basic nature is goodness. And we can listen to a crazy person who's insulting us and give them that space, but we will have already changed the situation by effecting the change on the inside.
Remember, this also takes,
Practice.
practice.
Long time.
It's not just hearing Victoria or me just say it, and then, there's a difference between intellectual understanding and realization meaning like embodiment, that
Yes.
accomplishment. That's where you're going to kind of perceive things from that place and react from that place. That's why we have a path. That's why we have a practice.
An accomplishment is a difference between mental sparring and juggling with concepts rather than like when you are dealing with a difficult situation that you can really deal with it. You can stay with it. You can give it the space it requires instead of bringing antagonism and fire and fuel into that situation. And always trying to work on the habitual patterns, trying to dissolve them, bringing mindfulness rather than anger. That's when practice is actually happening.
Can you fake it until you make it with bodhicitta? I sometimes have trouble truly feeling compassion for all beings. Wonder if I'm being insincere when saying these opening phrases. That's a really, really good question.
May I?
It's a very, very common, I think, dilemma. Yeah, I was going to say just that, to remember at least at a minimum the fact that of interdependence. Often that can kind of be a stepping stone. At least admit the fact of interdependence, like that you don't exist, that everything you have is a result of so many, such a complex chain of beings, contributing to that. Often that can be the gateway,
When I read your question just before Michael spoke, I wanted to say thank you so much for your sincerity, because that sincerity is exactly where the practice begins to happen. When, the normal habitual response is, oh, I know it, I know everything, how it is, blah, blah, blah. The real practitioner never thinks this way. Your sincerity is actually really a reflection of practice and mindfulness. And yes, of course, we fake it till we make it. What does it mean? We call it fake it. But what we mean, it's called aspirational bodhicitta, right? Before we open the door and we step out in the world, we say, may I have this mind of compassion. May I wish all beings, the four immeasurables. You put that armor on, what we call fake it, right? This is our motivation with which we want to step out. Besides putting our hat and coat against the frost, we put our bodhicitta, aspirational bodhicitta mind on before we, and if we remind ourselves over and over and over, eventually it'll become our reality. Not to just spit judgment out there as a response, but actually our heart will soften by this fake it till you make it mentality. Because yes, of course, this is where we are. We're just these little newbies, beginners who come from this ordinary mind of ego and afflictions, where if anybody doesn't look at me the right way, or I don't hear the words I want to hear from them, or they don't give me what I want, I will lash out and respond with my anger and jealousy like a 3-year-old. The fake it till you make it is the aspirational bodhicitta, which is we don it like an armor before we leave the house, before we get up and speak to our child, our parent, our neighbor, our coworker. We do it as constant reminder. This is what mindfulness is. Remembering. May I act like this? May my mind soften? May I actually not constantly see the world through the filters of the ignorance of ego and its afflictions? So yes, absolutely. And thank you for that beautiful question and for your sincerity, because this is truly where we are, and we have to always start with where we are, because we have to start with, we have to suspend the judgment on ourselves. We have to know who we are. We have to know that we're not these amazing practitioners that can handle any difficult situation. That's why we have our teachers as guides, so that we can remember, oh, how would my teacher, what kind of a heart would my teacher have in this situation? And we remember, we bring bodhicitta with us all the time. Even when we fail, we say, next time I'll do better. I won't say those hurtful things to that person or a neighbor who, aggravates us, or a coworker. We bring aspirational bodhicitta until the ultimate bodhicitta and aspirational bodhicitta become one and the same thing, until our responses can be so big and so clear that we don't have to fake it. We can just be in that all the time.
This is a really good question as well. How would you apply this practice to the experience of illness, particularly one that incapacitates? Why don't you answer that? You've been talking.
Our teacher says to, and always, whenever, I have a friend in trouble, somebody with cancer, somebody who's gone through tremendously traumatic loss, anything, our teacher Garchen Rinpoche will always say it's purification. When we understand that difficulties are given to us so that we can learn, so that we can overcome the self-grasping and ignorance, and so we can learn the forbearance and acceptance, because on the relative level, we're always dealing with two levels in Buddhism. There's the ultimate level of all things, and there's the relative level. This place, which is like a hospital, where we're learning the forbearance, the patience, the ability to stay with the situation, is the ability to first start to kind of like get out from under its weight. When we're not judging the situation, when we have forbearance, we can start to see the beauty almost in everything. I know it sounds kind of wishy-washy, but it is true. And sometimes, The important thing is in the difficult situation not to start to kind of cultivate the mind of selfishness and say, why does it happen to me? Why didn't it happen to that person? Why do I have to deal with this? Why doesn't this bad person that I know, why doesn't this, the situations happen to me because in Buddhism, there is a complete and absolutely clear understanding and ownership of everything that happens. I have planted the seeds, causes, and conditions of anything that happens to me right now are as a result of causes and conditions that I have planted through my activity in the past. That means not to, beat ourselves over the head, but to try to work with the situation that we have. Always working in the situation, remembering our bodhicitta mind and doing tonglen when we are feeling extremely in the grasp of severe difficulty, pain of loss or physical suffering. We open our mind and think of all the others who are undergoing through exactly the same or very similar kind of condition. Then our suffering becomes lessened by that, and also remembering that there's the impermanence, which is our life. That's our relative condition, our physical vessel. The impermanence of it means also that things can change. It can go from this tremendous difficulty to a much lessened version and form of it. We are purifying the difficulties that come to us, are things that kind of remove layers and layers and layers of deposits of negativity from us. Remembering that difficult circumstances should be viewed as lessons, as opportunities to learn. The 6 paramitas, forbearance, patience, generosity, ethical discipline, and of course, meditation and wisdom. Wisdom being the ground, meditation being the method, and those other paramitas which we need so much in moments of difficulty. But really just think about it. Where would we be learning if not in difficult situations? If we did not have difficult situations, Buddhas would not arise. Methods, which is Dharma, would not arise to liberation from all this difficulty. So sometimes, taking a difficult situation as a condition for practice is really, really good. And start your practice with thinking of your difficult situation and bringing all others of that difficult situation, then expanding it and making the practice even more vast and saying, may I bear this condition so that others may be relieved and don't have to bear that condition. But start with Tonglen for yourself, include yourself and all those who are sharing that same difficult condition with you. There's never a time where only one of us sentient beings is experiencing something that others are not experiencing at the same time. So remembering that, starting with the Tonglen for the group, and not just the human group, all sentient beings, and then expanding it and bringing that to all sentient beings and saying, well, if I am bearing this difficulty, may I bear it for all sentient beings so they don't have to experience that as well. And then really trying to use this as a basis for practice, for other practices. You can do purification practices. You can do guru yoga. There are so many skillful means. All of Dharma is skillful means for liberation. And when we're liberating others, we are always included. We are always included. We self-liberate in the mind of bodhicitta when we're liberating and living and practicing for the benefit of other sentient beings.
Is there a point with bodhicitta where you realize some individuals in your life are so far from a mindful mindset that you use your own experience, wisdom, and practice to avoid them completely? It sounds pretty un-Buddhist, but you have to protect your own mindset by staying away from overly testing people who have no interest in improving themselves or breaking down their ego. That's not necessarily a point in bodhicitta, right? It's something that just comes out of your own awareness. I mean, you're basically talking about creating boundaries, which I think is something that is very important. You know, our habitual tendencies kind of lead to habitual dynamics in relationships, and you know, let's not give ourselves so much credit thinking that it's because they're not developing and we are. I think it's a little healthier to just saying this dynamic is not working, or whatever they're doing um, is, not something I want to engage in, rather than thinking I have this bodhicitta heart, mind of kindness and compassion, and they're not developing, and I got to go away. That can, be the flip side of the habitual patterns, and going towards this a bit of arrogance, thinking that we're accomplished and they're not, and I have to leave them behind. It's probably more, maybe there's a spark of awareness that's saying, this relationship that it's kind of stayed at this certain level, and I realize that the dynamics created between myself and this other person don't serve me, or maybe don't serve them, or it's just not something I want to engage in anymore. And then yes, creating boundaries, moving on from relationships. I mean, there's certain relationships, listen, if you have a child who's dependent on you, you just say, I'm not dealing, my 10-year-old, I'm gonna create a boundary and not deal with them. I mean, that obviously you have to bring common sense to these things as well. And you have parents, and you're probably going to be a little bit more tolerant, and hang in there more with a parent, not always, but than you will with a more casual friendship or an acquaintance and things like that. But keep it in a perspective of just like you've realized that this isn't working and there's some negative stuff happening and you don't want to deal with it, and that's fine. I think it gets a little tricky when we start to put it in terms of any kind of realization or something like that.
And the 37 Bodhisattva practices definitely has one of the practices says that negative company and negative places should be abandoned. That also has to do with the realization that we right now, as we are in the current state of awareness or mental condition, has no capacity to deal with certain difficult beings. When we can come back, and we don't have to leave, but we should be honest and start with where we are. And if we have people in our lives, let's say people who are our drinking buddies, or buddies with whom we keep doing drugs or getting into trouble and things like that, we absolutely definitively abandon those kinds of situations, to cultivate a bodhicitta mind. Also, relationships where, as Michael said, we have karmic relations which we cannot abandon, because it really means selfishness on steroids, and then just falling into deeper, darkness of that afflicted, self-grasping mind, and selfishness. But the situations where we know we still don't have the capacity, and it influences us in a very, very bad way, absolutely, definitively, yes, we abandon them to continue to cultivate and work on our mind of bodhicitta. When our mind has enough strength, we don't have to leave anywhere or anything. We can live with robbers and killers, and we can be just fine. And our teachers are examples to things like that. Garchen Rinpoche was in a labor camp for 20 years. And he always said that for him to would be much better to lose life than to lose his bodhicitta, because for him to, the teaching, and that when he would always say that to us many, many times over and over again, it is better not to live than, just to live in this kind of ordinary angry state of mind, then it would be preferable not to live than not to have mind of bodhicitta. So we do leave difficult places depending on our capacity. We do abandon companions with whom in tandem we cultivate nothing but negative behaviors until we gain stability and strength of bodhicitta, where we can withstand and we can not be influenced and fall into negative states of mind. At the same time, we're never judging people. We're leaving them because we're saying, well, I don't have the strength to withstand the negativity. We're not making judgment. Judgment is just ordinary way of, habitual self-grasping ego tendencies. We wish them always well, and we leave them with thinking, may they have happiness and the causes of happiness, may they be free from suffering, etc., etc. And you're also saying, I'm leaving you so that I may not cause you my afflictive judgmental things as well. And yes, we do leave difficult places and companions until our mind becomes stronger and firm in bodhicitta.
We're out of time. Just in general, people are asking about teachers. I mean, if you don't live in a place where there's, a Buddhist center, that's okay. Go online, go to these teachers' websites, watch their YouTubes, watch their videos. There's teachers and books on the Solidago Productions website that we recommend. That the website where you registered. That Instagram page I mentioned is jangchub.norbu. jangchub.norbu. We will dedicate the merit from today's session, the benefit of all beings. By this merit, may all beings attain
Stay
the
in the
state of
omniscience,
enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Thank you, Nick, our producer. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.